My friend, there comes a time in every believer's life when the heavens grow quiet, when the words you once spoke so boldly now tremble on your lips, and God whispers deep within your spirit, "Stay silent." Oh, my friend, I know what that silence feels like. It's the silence of the chosen. It's the sacred hush that settles over the soul when God is doing something so divine, so deep, that words would only disturb it. You see, when God chooses you, He doesn't always send applause. Sometimes He sends isolation. He doesn't always open doors. Sometimes He closes mouths. Because when God sets apart His chosen, He hides them, He tests them, and He teaches them the holy power of silence. The world says, "Speak your truth." But God says, "Wait for mine." The world says, "Defend yourself." But God says, "I will be your defender." The world says, "Make them understand you." But God says, "Let me vindicate you." There is a battlefield where words cannot win. And sometimes silence is your greatest weapon, because when you stay silent in obedience, heaven begins to speak on your behalf. When you stop fighting with your tongue, God starts fighting with His hand. Some of you have been misunderstood. You've been accused, ignored, and rejected, not because you are weak, but because you are chosen. And when you are chosen, God will allow your silence to test the strength of your faith. He will watch to see if you can trust Him without explanation, if you can believe Him without recognition, and if you can stand still while He fights for you. Oh, dear soul, hear me. Silence does not mean God has forgotten you. It means He's forming you. The cocoon is quiet before the butterfly breaks forth. The tomb was silent before resurrection morning, and your heart may feel still, but something powerful is preparing to rise. So stay silent, not in fear, but in faith. Stay silent, not in defeat, but in divine discipline. Because when the silence breaks, your voice will carry heaven's thunder. The chosen ones understand God does His greatest work in the quiet. He molds prophets in caves. He shapes kings in fields, and He trains warriors in the stillness of their waiting. So if you feel hidden right now, if you feel like no one hears you, no one sees you, no one understands the storm inside your chest, remember this: God sees the silent, God honors the silent, and God will raise the silent. Your silence is not the end, it's the beginning of God's revelation. Hold your peace. Watch what He does. For the day will come when heaven will break your silence with victory. Because the chosen don't need to shout to be seen. They just need to trust to be sent. And when God says, "Stay silent," it's not rejection, it's preparation. He's not quieting your voice. He's sharpening it. He's not delaying your purpose. He's defining it. And when He finally says, "Speak," the world will know that silence was never empty, it was sacred. There is a sacred mystery hidden in the silence of God. When He tells His chosen ones to stay silent, He is not muting their purpose. He is multiplying their power. Silence is not the absence of God's presence. It is often the atmosphere of His greatest work. When the Lord tells you to hold your tongue, to keep your peace, to walk quietly through a storm of misunderstanding, it is not because He wants you to lose your voice, but because He is preparing to give that voice divine authority. Many people mistake silence for weakness, but the truth is, silence can be the loudest expression of faith. When you have every reason to speak, to argue, to defend, and yet you remain still before the Lord, you declare to the world that your trust is in Him, not in yourself. When God says, "Stay silent," He is teaching His chosen ones to let their confidence rest in His plan, rather than in human reasoning. There is power in silence because it removes the noise of the world and tunes the heart to the frequency of heaven. In those quiet moments, when your heart aches to be heard, but your spirit hears the whisper of God saying, "Wet," something begins to shift inside you. You start to realize that silence is not punishment, it is preparation. God is crafting something in that stillness that will one day speak louder than your words ever could. Think of Moses standing before the Red Sea. The people cried out in fear, and yet the instruction of God was simple. Be still. It wasn't time to talk, it was time to trust. The sea would part not because of Moses' voice, but because of God's power. That is what happens when the chosen obey the command to stay silent. God begins to move. You may not see it immediately, but the silence is filled with unseen activity. Heaven is arranging the miracle, aligning the moment, and preparing the testimony. When you choose silence in obedience, you are giving God space to speak through His actions rather than through your explanations. You are surrendering control, and surrender is the soil in which divine strength grows. Every time you hold your tongue when you could have spoken in frustration, every time you resist the urge to prove yourself right, every time you choose stillness over argument, your spirit grows stronger. You learn that silence is not the absence of response. It is the presence of restraint. It is faith in motion, a quiet confidence that the God who sees will also vindicate. In the silence, God also protects you. He shields you from saying what could destroy your future or delay your destiny. Words spoken in anger can cut deep, but silence can preserve peace. The chosen learn that not every battle requires a sword. Some victories are won by standing still. Sometimes, the most powerful sermon you can preach is the one you don't speak at all. The one you live through endurance, patience, and unwavering faith. Silence also becomes the classroom of the chosen. It is where God refines motives, heals wounds, and teaches discernment. When you stop talking, you start hearing more clearly. You hear the whispers of the Holy Spirit. You hear the reminders of promise. You hear the comfort of God saying, "Be still and know that I am God." That kind of knowledge doesn't come through noise. It comes through stillness. The world around you may mock your quietness, calling it passivity, but heaven calls it power, because only the strong can stay silent when everything inside them screams to be heard. There will be times when people misunderstand your silence. They will think you've given up, that you've lost your fire, or that you have nothing left to say. But deep down, you know that silence is not your defeat. It is your declaration of trust. You are saying, "I don't need to prove anything. My God will prove everything." And when He finally moves, it will be evident that His hand was working all along while you kept still. So if God has called you to silence in this season, don't despise it, embrace it. Let the quiet strengthen you. Let it teach you how to listen more than you speak, how to trust more than you act, and how to believe even when you don't understand. Silence is not empty. It's full of purpose. It's God's way of saying, "I'm still working." You may not see the outcome yet, but one day your silence will turn into a song. Your stillness will become a story, and the very things you couldn't explain will become your testimony. The power of divine silence is this: it allows God to reveal Himself in ways your words never could. When you step back, He steps in. When you stay silent, He speaks louder. And when the world finally hears your voice again, it will carry the weight of heaven. Because those who have walked through God's silence speak with the authority of those who have heard His whisper. There is a season in every chosen person's life when God hides them. It is a season of silence, obscurity, and stillness. A season when no one seems to notice your faithfulness, your prayers, or your sacrifices. You look around and wonder why others are being celebrated, why their voices are being heard, and why their paths seem wide open while yours is narrow and quiet. But what you do not see is that this hidden season is not a punishment. It is protection. God hides those He has chosen, not to forget them, but to form them. He tucks them away in the secret places of silence, because He is shaping them for something too great to be exposed too soon. When God calls someone, He doesn't always send them straight into the spotlight. Before He reveals a life, He refines it. Before He entrusts you with influence, He strengthens your integrity. And that strengthening does not happen in noise or in crowds. It happens in stillness, in solitude, in silence. The chosen must first be trained to hear the voice of God when all other voices fade. That training ground is lonely. It's a space where you question, where you wait, where you wrestle with unseen things. But through it all, God is working in the dark what will one day shine in the light. David knew this kind of season. Before he ever held a crown, he held a harp in the fields where no one watched. While others were being anointed before men, he was being anointed before God. His silence in the wilderness prepared him to speak with authority in the palace. The same pattern can be found in Moses, in Joseph, in Esther, in John the Baptist. All of them had hidden seasons before their divine assignments began. Every chosen vessel must endure the hush of heaven before the trumpet of purpose sounds. In the hidden season of the chosen is the time when patience becomes your greatest teacher. It is in waiting that faith is purified. God allows silence to stretch your spirit to prove whether you love Him for His presence or only for His promotion. When everything around you feels paused, heaven is testing the depth of your trust. Can you still worship when there is no applause? Can you still serve when no one sees? Can you still believe when every door stays shut? If you can, then you have learned the lesson of the chosen. That obscurity is not the enemy of destiny, but the evidence of it. There's something sacred about being hidden by God. The world might overlook you, but heaven watches closely. Every tear, every prayer, every act of faith done in silence becomes a seed. And when the time comes, God will cause that seed to sprout suddenly, in ways you never expected. But you cannot rush the process. Just as a seed cannot demand to bloom before its roots grow deep, a chosen soul cannot demand recognition before their foundation is secure. Hidden seasons are divine investments. They are the moments when God buries you, not to end you, but to prepare you for resurrection. When God keeps you in silence, He's building spiritual muscles that visibility could never give. He's teaching you that your worth doesn't depend on validation. Your calling doesn't depend on applause, and your strength doesn't depend on human support. In the quiet, your ears grow sensitive to His whispers. You begin to discern His timing, to sense His hand even when you cannot see His face. It is there, in the hush of waiting, that true anointing is born. Many people want the public platform, but not the private process. They want the recognition of being chosen without the refinement that comes with being hidden. But the chosen ones who walk through the hidden season come out with something unshakable. They don't just speak about God, they carry Him. They don't just tell stories, they testify from experience. Because they have seen Him in the silence, they can stand before any crowd with confidence that their purpose is not self-made, it's God-breathed. So if you find yourself in that quiet season right now, don't mistake it for abandonment. The silence is not the absence of God. It's the sound of His work behind the scenes. He is weaving things together, writing chapters that will one day make sense. You may not be visible yet, but you are valuable. You may not be celebrated yet, but you are chosen. And when your hidden season is over, the unveiling will be undeniable, not because you forced it, but because God ordained it. Every prophet must endure a desert before they deliver their message. Every light must face the night before it shines. Every chosen one must learn to be still before they can be sent. So don't despise your hiddenness. Embrace it. Let it mold you, purify you, and prepare you. Because when God finally calls your name into the open, you will not only speak with power, you will carry the weight of heaven's silence within your words. And the world will know that your voice has been shaped by the whisper of God. There are moments in life when God tells His children to stay silent, not because He wants them to feel powerless, but because He Himself is stepping onto the battlefield. When God fights for you, your silence becomes a shield of faith. It is not a sign of surrender to the enemy. It is surrender to the will of God. Sometimes, He asks you to be quiet because the battle you face cannot be won with words, logic, or emotion. It must be won with trust. It must be won by letting God prove that His strength is greater than your struggle. There are times when you want to defend yourself, to explain your side, to make everyone understand the truth of who you are. But God whispers, "Be still. Let me speak for you." The chosen ones understand that when they stay silent in obedience, heaven begins to move on their behalf. When you refuse to fight with human weapons, you make room for divine intervention. When you stop trying to control outcomes, you invite the Almighty to take control. Your silence becomes your act of faith, your way of saying, "God, I trust you more than my voice." Think of the Israelites standing before the walls of Jericho. God didn't tell them to shout on the first day. For 6 days they walked in silence, carrying the Ark of the Covenant around those massive walls without saying a word. It must have looked foolish to their enemies, but in that silence, faith was being built and obedience was being tested. On the 7th day, when the time came to shout, their voices carried the power of heaven. The walls fell not because of their volume, but because of their obedience. The silence before the shout was where the victory began. In the same way, God often tells His chosen ones to stay silent when they are surrounded by opposition. The quiet is not emptiness. It is strategy. He asks you to hold your peace while He works behind the curtain. The enemy thinks your silence means defeat, but in reality, it means God is preparing His move. He is gathering His angels, aligning circumstances, and turning hearts in ways you cannot see. When you speak, you may create ripples, but when God moves, He creates waves. Your silence allows Him to do what your strength never could. There are battles in life that words can only worsen. Arguments, gossip, accusations. These things drain your spirit. But when you choose silence, you stop feeding the fire. You say, "I will not fight in the flesh. I will stand in faith." That kind of faith disarms the enemy. It confuses those who attack you. It silences those who expect a reaction. And most of all, it glorifies God. Because while others are shouting, you are trusting. While others are trying to prove their point, you are proving your peace. And that peace is evidence that the Lord Himself is fighting for you. When God fights your battles, He doesn't need your help. He needs your heart. He doesn't need your defense. He needs your devotion. Silence becomes your weapon because it is born from surrender. You are no longer trying to win by your wisdom or your words. You are letting God display His power. In that silence, you will often see miracles unfold. Relationships are restored, enemies are silenced, and paths are opened. Not by what you said, but by what you trusted God to say on your behalf. Moses stood before the Red Sea with an army behind him and no escape ahead. The people panicked, but God gave him a simple command. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Those words echo through generations. They remind every chosen heart that silence is sometimes the loudest declaration of faith. When you stand still, heaven begins to move. The sea splits, the ground appears, and what once seemed impossible becomes the very path of deliverance. Some people might not understand your silence. They might mistake it for fear or confusion. But those who are chosen know that divine silence carries divine strength. It is the quiet confidence that says, "My God is greater than this storm." When you refuse to retaliate, when you stop explaining yourself, when you let go of the need to be understood, you give God permission to show Himself as your defender. And when He defends, He leaves no doubt about who is in control. So if you find yourself in a season where God has told you to stay silent while the battle rages, do not be discouraged. The silence is not abandonment, it is alignment. Heaven is aligning for your victory. God is preparing a testimony so powerful that no argument will be needed to prove it. Your silence will speak through the outcome. The victory will shout louder than any words you could have said. Let the world talk. Let the enemy whisper. Let doubt try to rise. You, child of God, remain still. For when God fights while you stay silent, the results are undeniable. The same hand that parted seas, that shut the mouths of lions, that calmed raging storms, is fighting for you now. And when the battle is over, when the dust settles, you will stand with peace in your heart, knowing you didn't win by might or by words, but by faith in the one who fights for his chosen in the silence. There is a sacred strength that only silence can teach, a discipline that turns chaos into peace, confusion into clarity, and pain into purpose. When God says to his chosen ones, stay silent, he is not asking them to become passive. He is calling them to learn the discipline of holding their peace. It takes more power to be silent in obedience than to speak in anger. It takes more faith to wait on God than to react to people. The world celebrates those who shout the loudest, but heaven honors those who stay still and trust the Lord. Silence, in the hands of a believer, is not emptiness. It is power under control. To hold your peace does not mean you have no emotions. It means your emotions no longer have you. It means that when you are insulted, you do not respond in pride. When you are misunderstood, you do not rush to defend yourself. When you are provoked, you do not let bitterness take root. It means that even when the storm is raging within you, your soul rests in the truth that God is greater than your storm. This kind of peace does not come naturally. It must be learned through discipline. It is a daily choice to keep your heart quiet even when your flesh wants to speak. Jesus himself modeled this discipline. When he stood before Pilate and the crowd demanded his death, he did not argue or shout. He stayed silent, fulfilling prophecy and revealing strength that words could never show. His silence was not weakness, it was divine control. He understood that peace is not found in proving a point, but in fulfilling a purpose. The chosen of God must walk in that same discipline, learning that sometimes silence speaks louder than defense, and peace is a greater testimony than power. To hold your peace means to surrender your right to fight for your own justice and allow God to be your defender. It means you trust his timing, his plan, and his vengeance. You understand that the battle is not yours, it belongs to the Lord. And while others may be shouting and striving, you are listening for the still, small voice that guides the faithful. You are choosing to rest while God works. That rest is not laziness. It is confidence in divine sovereignty. The discipline of holding peace also protects your spirit. Words spoken in haste can wound deeply and cannot be taken back. Silence, on the other hand, gives space for healing, for wisdom, and for God's direction. When you stay silent before responding, you allow the Spirit of God to guide your tongue. The Bible says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. That is not just good advice. It is a spiritual key. It opens the door for peace to reign in your heart and keeps you aligned with heaven's rhythm instead of the world's noise. When you hold your peace, you also create room for miracles. Think of the Israelites at the edge of the Red Sea, terrified and desperate. Moses told them, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. It sounded impossible. How could stillness lead to victory? Yet, when they obeyed, the sea parted. Their peace became the pathway to deliverance. That is what happens when you choose to be still. God moves in ways that defy logic. The discipline of silence allows his hand to work without interference from our fear or frustration. There will be times when you are tempted to speak too soon, to argue, to complain, to justify. But the chosen understand that every word has weight, and not every battle deserves a response. Some things are better left in God's hands. The discipline of holding peace teaches you that silence is not avoidance, it is alignment. You are aligning your heart with heaven, your thoughts with truth, and your actions with faith. And when you stand in that stillness, nothing can shake you. In a world full of noise, The disciplined believer becomes a sanctuary of peace. While others are drowning in chaos, your silence becomes a lighthouse of calm. People will notice that you respond differently, that you are not easily provoked or distracted. They will wonder how you keep your peace when everything around you screams for reaction. That is when your silence becomes a testimony. They will see that it is not your strength keeping you still. It is God's peace within you. The chosen learn that peace is not the absence of trouble. It is the presence of trust. It is the stillness that comes when you know that God is in control, even when life feels out of control. It is the decision to say, Lord, I don't need to understand everything. I just need to trust you. That is the heart of true discipline. When obedience becomes greater than impulse, when faith outweighs frustration, and when silence becomes your strongest form of worship. So when God tells you to stay silent, remember that He is not silencing your spirit. He is strengthening it. Every time you hold your peace, your faith grows deeper. Every moment you stay still, your roots go further into His presence. And one day, when He tells you to speak, your words will carry power because they were born in silence. Until then, keep your heart quiet, your trust strong, and your peace guarded. For the discipline of holding peace is not just a command, it is a calling to reflect the calm of Christ in a world that knows only noise. There is a divine reward that comes to those who endure the silence, a blessing reserved for those who choose to trust God when nothing makes sense, who stay faithful when no one is watching, and who remain silent when their hearts are breaking. The chosen ones are not only called to great purpose, they are also called to great patience. And patience is proven in silence. It is in those quiet, hidden seasons that God does His deepest work in the soul. While others are rushing to be seen, the chosen are resting in being shaped. When they finally emerge, they do not come out the same. They come out refined, stronger, wiser, and ready to speak with power. The reward of silence is revelation. When you stop speaking and start listening, you begin to hear God in ways you never could before. His whispers become clearer. His direction becomes sharper. The silence that once felt painful becomes precious because it is filled with His presence. Those who endure silence come to understand that waiting on God is never wasted time. It is the womb of destiny. God uses silence to build spiritual depth. He hides His chosen so that He can reveal Himself more personally to them. And when that revelation comes, no crowd, no stage, and no recognition can compare to the beauty of knowing God for yourself. The chosen who endure silence also receive the reward of peace. The noise of the world loses its grip on them. They are not easily shaken by opinions or moved by pressure because they have learned how to rest in God's timing. Silence teaches them that God's approval is greater than man's applause. And when you no longer live for the praise of people, you become unstoppable. Your spirit becomes anchored. You learn that your value is not in visibility, but in obedience. This kind of peace cannot be bought or borrowed. It must be learned in the quiet classroom of God's silence. There is also the reward of promotion that follows silence. When God keeps you hidden, it's not because He has forgotten you. It's because He's preparing the right moment to reveal you. Every chosen person must walk through a season of obscurity before stepping into a season of elevation. Joseph was hidden in a prison before standing in a palace. David was hidden in the wilderness before ruling a kingdom. Jesus lived in silence for 30 years before beginning 3 years of world-changing ministry. The hidden years are never wasted years. They are divine preparation for a public purpose. When the time finally comes, God doesn't just open a door, He opens a destiny. Another reward that comes through silence is spiritual authority. Those who endure the silence of God gain a depth of faith that cannot be shaken by storms or stolen by trials. Their words carry weight because their silence carried worship. When they finally speak, their voice is not filled with opinion. It's filled with anointing. You can always tell when someone has been through a silent season with God. There is a gentleness, a wisdom, a quiet power in them that only comes from walking closely with the Lord. They don't speak to impress, they speak to impart. Their silence became their sanctuary, and out of that sanctuary flows strength. The chosen who remain silent when misunderstood, who stay humble when overlooked, and who keep trusting when they cannot see. They are the ones God raises in His time. He sees their tears, their prayers, their patience, and their faithfulness. And when their season of silence ends, He lifts them higher than they could ever have lifted themselves. Because the same God who told them to be silent is the God who will one day say, "Now speak." And when He says it, their voice will carry heaven's power because it was forged in the fire of silence. In the end, the reward of silence is transformation. You cannot go through a season of silence and remain the same. God changes you from the inside out. He removes pride, purifies motives, strengthens endurance, and fills your heart with a quiet confidence. When you finally step into the light, you no longer seek attention, you seek assignment. You no longer crave recognition, you crave revelation. Silence has done its holy work, and now your spirit shines with a peace that passes understanding. So to every chosen one walking through a silent season, take heart. God has not forgotten you. He is watching how you wait, how you trust, and how you hold your peace. Your silence is not a sign of defeat. It is the soil where victory grows. You may not see it now, but one day you will thank God for every quiet night, every unanswered prayer, every lonely moment, because each one was shaping you into who you were meant to be. When the silence breaks, it will not sound like your pain. It will sound like purpose. The world will hear your voice and know it carries the echo of heaven. For the reward of the silent ones is not only what they receive, it's who they become. They become living testimonies that waiting on God is never in vain. That silence is not the absence of power, but the birthplace of it, and that those who trust Him in the quiet will one day speak with the thunder of His glory.